Hey everyone, this is the conclusion of my Hellblazer coverage. This is volume 8. It ends at issue 83, which is the end of Garth Ennis's run. Thank you everyone that has been watching all these videos I've been putting out for the last 2.5 months, breaking down tons of Hellblazer, all the way from the beginning at Hellblazer issue 1 in Jamie Delano's run, and going here all the way to the end of Ennis's run. So yeah, it'll be an exciting time. Now, technically, Garth Ennis does come back at issue 129 for a 5-issue arc called Son of Man, but that is a self-contained story, and really, the conclusion to Ennis's run is kind of here, where he kind of wraps a lot of stuff up. We're going to see the conclusion between John's confrontation with the first of the fallen, Satan, which has been building up ever since the Dangerous Habits story arc, so that will be an exciting time. Ennis introduced a lot of supporting characters for John, a lot of friends of his, and I will spoil that not all of them are going to make it out of this volume alive, so we will see who makes it through to the end. So many of John's friends die, and it is unfortunate that they still continue to die, but we will see who survives in here. Now, Hellblazer does continue onwards after this. It goes all the way to issue 300, collected in 26 volumes, and then DC reboots and renumbers it and continues and goes on and on and on forever. But volume 8 here is really the end of Ennis's run, so that's why I'm stopping here. So let's dive into it. Let's see how Ennis wraps everything up here in volume 8.
Hellblazer Volume 8, Rake at the Gates of Hell. Written by Garth Ennis, art by Steve Dillon, William Simpson, and Peter Snejbjerg. This volume covers issues 72 to 83. Hellblazer issue 72, Damnation's Flame, part 1 of 4, A Brave New World. Papa Midnight is the voodoo priest operating out of Manhattan, whom we first met in issues 1 and 2 of Hellblazer. John and Papa Midnight had an alliance in that storyline, but Midnight is usually at odds with John. When this issue opens, we see a woman walking on a beach. She is named Sedella. She is the sister of Papa Midnight. However, she is now dead, and has been dead for some time. Papa Midnight murdered her years ago, and for 10 days after her death, he performed a powerful spell on her, and it kept her from passing on, and it also stained her soul, so that she would enter hell. He has established a connection with her, which he would channel through her skull, which he keeps close to him. Once she was in hell, she was her brother's slave. She slept with demons and stole their secrets and power, allowing Midnight to rise to power in the mortal world. John Constantine manages to snag the last seat on an early flight to New York. Unfortunately, it's in the non-smoking section, and John is sitting beside a relentless chatterbox, just talking to John constantly. To drown out the annoyance, John flips through the in-flight magazine, and he comes across an ad condemning magic users. Amused, as a bit, John decides to write a letter to the ad requesting information under the name of his friend, the psychic Nigel Archer. Finally, once John arrives in New York, he stops by an Irish pub, where the bartender still remembers John from a decade ago, back when John and his friend Brandon Finn were around. As John drinks his pint of beer, he reflects on those days with a rare bit of nostalgia. Meanwhile, Papa Midnight is having a meeting with a man named Zerkay. Zerkay reports John's arrival in New York. He delights in the fact that Constantine has changed. He no longer carries the same sharp presence he once did. Sensing weakness, Papa Midnight consults with his sister Sedelia's skull. He consults with it for confirmation if he should act, and Papa Midnight determines it is the perfect time now for his revenge on John. Midnight ominously says, "Can I take him on a walk through hell?" Back over to John. John manages to casually use some magic to get himself a free room at this hotel. As John is in his hotel room, he reflects on the past year of his life. And deep down, John knows he has really been spiraling ever since his ex-girlfriend Kit Ryan left him. John, he needs to get back into the game before the first of the fallen catches up with him. John, he then returns to the pub and downs another beer, only to realize, too late, that it has been laced with a powerful hallucinogen by Papa Midnight. Soon, visions of horror engulf John, and he stumbles out of the bar disoriented. Papa Midnight has sent John on something called witch-walking. John, he kind of blacks out, then when he comes through, he's in a darkened room, and a man there claims that they are in Ellis Island, and the guy grills John, asks for his name, his nationality, if he has a criminal record, and most importantly, what is John's destination. John, he answers all the questions except for the last, his destination. The man only smirks and tells John, "Heh, I guess you'll find out soon enough, huh? Well, Mr. Constantine, welcome to the United States of America." The door is open, John stumbles out, and he enters into a warped, nightmarish version of New York City and America. Hellblazer issue 73, Damnation's Flame, part 2 of 4, Broadway the Hard Way. John continues his witch-walking, nightmarish version of America hallucination thanks to Papa Midnight's drugging of him last issue. In John's hallucination world, he envisions he is attacked by cannibals in Central Park who cut his throat, but then they retreat when screaming dollar bills fall from a red sky. John, he then thinks he must be in hell. His jugular vein is cut straight through, but yet he's not dead. And then, in John's hallucination world, he meets JFK, only JFK has the top of his head blown off. And Kennedy, he must continually hold his hand against the back of his head to keep his brains from falling out. And while all of this was happening to John in the hallucination world, in the real world, John was acting very irrationally, and some cops came across his path. They saw that John was really high, so they scooped him up and threw him in their squad car, and then they drove John to a homeless shelter and abandoned him there. Eventually, some of the other hobos, realizing that John is out of it and high as hell, decide to attempt to rob him, and then they also piss on him for good measure. Hellblazer issue 74, Damnation's Flame, part 3 of 4, Trail of Tears. In the hallucinatory world, John strikes a deal with JFK. If JFK helps John navigate this nightmarish version of America, John will help JFK overthrow this nightmare world's current ruler. So with this agreement made, John and JFK continue walking through the nightmare version of America, and they are heading to Washington. While they are journeying elsewhere within this nightmare world, a whole bunch of Native American spirits are also seeking a way out of this twisted realm, and they think John, who comes from the other place, might be their ticket out of here. Meanwhile, John and JFK arrive at the nightmare version of Washington. They see various warped versions of Washington monuments until they eventually arrive at the White House. There, JFK reaffirms his agreement with John. He says, "The terms of our agreement state that you will help me oust the present incumbent and thereby regain my presidency. In return, I will lead you to the executive agency restraining you within the borders of this country." So JFK is going to help John get out of here, but John has to help him overthrow the ruler of this land, which happens to reside in the White House. John and JFK then climb into the sewers. They're going to take a back route to get into the White House. Their journey leads them to Sodella, the sister of Papa Midnight. She explains who she is to John and how John came to be here, how her brother Papa Midnight did this to John, trapped him in this nightmare world. John becomes very furious once he learns Papa Midnight is behind him being stuck here. Sodella then tells John her plight, how her brother killed her, performed powerful spells on her, and sent her to hell, and in hell had her do his bidding and made him powerful in the real world. She asks if John can help her. John answers, "Can you get me out of here?" Sodella says she can, so John lights a cigarette and says he's going to help her. He explains, "I don't know much about voodoo, but all magic works around knowledge. Midnight's your brother, and he knew you inside out. Be no stopping him. It takes a mark on the spirit to send an innocent to hell. That'll be what you felt him doing to you." Sodella asks if John can remove the mark on her spirit. John replies, "Show me your soul. By the way, it'll hurt." So John, he does something with his cigarette to remove the mark on Sodella's soul. Once John is done, he asks her how do they get out. Sodella explains, "We can all leave together. My brother witch-walked you in here. You can leave any time, provided you know the way out. I can show you." Sodella leads them through these underground sewers and then eventually leads them to a ladder, reaching up to the surface. Once they climb up the ladder and reach the surface, they are surrounded by the native spirits, also hunting for a way out of here. Hellblazer issue 75, Damnation's Flame, part 404. Hail to the Chief! The native spirits insist John help them leave this place. John tells the spirits, "What do you want from me? Look, I'm telling you, I bloody swear, I don't know." The native spirits realize John is telling the truth. They say, "He doesn't know the way. His path lies through betrayal. He is no good to us. He carries the taint of the old world as much as any of them. He is just another white man." The spirits leave and John recomposes himself. JFK once again reminds John, "The administration appreciates the difficulty of your position, but would like to remind you of your commitment to assisting the administration regain its former office." John responds, "Oh, it's just one life after another with you, innit?" Sodella then tells John she is leaving, but she tells John, "There's nothing keeping either of us here, John. I'm moving on. I will stop to visit my brother on the way, but my time here is finished. And if you want to leave, all you need to do is wake up." So Sodella disappears, and John responds, "Easier said than done. Alright, let's get on with it." So John and JFK, with his brains blown out, walk into the White House. They walk through the various halls, eventually making their way to the Oval Office. And the president in charge there is Abraham Lincoln. John, he senses trouble and he ditches JFK to let JFK face Lincoln alone. Lincoln then brutally rips off both of JFK's arms. Meanwhile, John Constantine disappears into a black void and begins his journey to finally waking up. Meanwhile, in the real world, Sodella, with her powers from beyond the grave, manages to influence her brother, Papa Midnight, to get in a cab and travel to the Empire State Building. He then travels to the top of that building and jumps off, committing suicide. Elsewhere, John Constantine manages to finally wake up and is back in the real world. John wakes up just in time, as some of the homeless men that were messing with John were about to set him on fire. But John, he wakes up and he pokes one of the men in the eye, and then he makes his escape. John, he then makes one last visit to the bar that he was in earlier, and grabs himself another beer. That is when a civilian on the street runs into the bar covered in Papa Midnight's blood, as Papa Midnight jumped off the Empire State Building and splattered everywhere. The civilian, he says, "I was just walking along and this guy, he must have jumped off the Empire. The blood, the friggin' blood, he burst open, man. Look, I'm covered in it." He's spread all over the street out there. The bartender yells, "Well, will you for Jesus' sake get the hell out of here? You're dripping that shit all over the place." Meanwhile, back in the nightmare world, Abraham Lincoln is still in charge, and JFK is just walking down the street. Lincoln ripped off JFK's arms, so JFK can no longer hold his brains in. So as JFK continues walking down this nightmare street, he is attempting to sing some patriotic songs, but as his brains are falling out, he is slowly forgetting the words. "My country 'tis of the sweet land of liberty, of the I sing, land, father's, mountainside, era. And with this, we end the Damnation's Flame story arc. Continuing on now. Hellblazer issue 76, Confessions of an Irish Rebel. On Constantine's flight from New York back to his home in London, the Boeing aircraft he was on suffered some mechanical issues, so it had to land in Dublin, Ireland instead. And then once the plane landed, the air traffic controllers went on strike, so John was basically stuck there. With not much else to do, John decided, screw it, he's going down to the bar to get a drink. While John is in a bar there in Dublin, the ghost of his friend, Brandon Finn, arrives in the bar. John and him talk, almost like Brandon is a real, live person. The two of them decide to go for a walk on the street and hit up some of their favorite bars in the area. Throughout their night on the town, they discuss old times and things they did. They discuss Kit and how John was dating her. Brandon said to John, "I always knew you fancied her, and I knew you had the decency not to do anything stupid." John, reflecting on his relationship, says, "Well, I tried my best, but it all came crashing down around my ears." The two of them then discussed politics. And even though Brandon's a ghost, they managed to share some fish and chips. At the end of the night, John passed out from drunkenness, and when he woke up in the morning, Brandon was gone. And John, he then got on a boat to England and home. Hellblazer issue 77, and the crowd goes wild. We check back in now on John's old friend, Chaz Chandler. John and Chaz haven't spoken ever since their falling out when Kit first left John and Chaz got into a fight. On this night, Chaz is out with his friends, and they're at a bar, drinking. Chaz's friends know that Chaz used to be friends with John and John's reputation, and they ask Chaz for a story on John. So Chaz decides to share his story. Chaz explains that John, back in the day, used to be part of a band in the 70s, a punk band. They were bloody dreadful. Anyway, about 5 years after they split up, John got a call, and it led to a lead on a supposed haunted house. Chaz accompanied John on his mission to investigate this haunted house, which supposedly had ghosts. And the ghosts were a Victorian-era father and his daughter. The father had spent his life committing unspeakable acts against the daughter, beating and strangling her and punishing her, and even now, in death, his spirit refused to let go. So even though the father and the daughter are still ghosts, the father is still abusing his daughter. So John intervened, and he managed to convince the daughter that her suffering had ended. He told the ghost of her, "It's not really happening, love. It stopped happening a long time ago. You haven't realized, that's all. You don't need to stay with him anymore. Come on, why stay here? Look, right in front of you. This is the way out." John, he then shows some candles that he had set up in the room. So the daughter, now having realized that she is dead and she no longer has to stay with her abusive father, she follows the candles and manages to ascend to heaven. This enraged the father's ghost, though, and he lashed out and attacked John. The ghost then seemingly disappeared with John in what Chaz could only assume was hell. Chaz, he believed that John was gone for good, that John had died. Chaz even arranged a funeral service where a lot of John's old friends and family arrived. Even John's sister Cheryl and niece Gemma were there. Rick the Vic said some words. He said, "I would like to begin with a reading from the book of Proverbs, chapter 21, verse 30. There is no wisdom, no insight, no plan that can succeed against the Lord." Rick, he then threw the book behind him and said, "Tell that to John Constantine. John, he followed no creed save his own, and I, for one, will not condemn him for it. He walked from darkness into light and back again, and made enemies from camps both good and evil on his way. He would not accept the judgments of morality or society, no matter how powerful the structures that supported them. In fact, he trusted no judgment save his own when choosing courses, loves, and friends, which is perhaps why he ended up with us. I would like to finish what I hope has been a mercifully short sermon by stating that John will never be forgotten, except that I would fear be stating the overwhelmingly obvious. Thank you." And then, as soon as Rick was finished, John casually dropped in on his own funeral saying, "Yeah, cheers, Rick." What'd I say?" John's friends and family are surprised to see John alive. John's friend Heather said, "You wee bastard." Rick the Vic, he chimed in, "Thanks for allowing me to make a complete tit of myself." And Cheryl wept, saying, "I knew it." Back in the current day, Chaz's friends hear Chaz's story, and they press Chaz for more details. How did John come back from the supposed dead? From hell? Chaz answered, "I don't know. He never explained it to me. He said he made a deal and left it at that. Said I wouldn't understand." Chaz's friends eventually leave, saying, "That's the biggest load of friggin' crap I've ever heard." As Chaz's friends all leave Chaz alone, eventually, John arrives. This is the first time they have seen each other since their falling out. Chaz tells John, "I've got nothing to say to you." John begs Chaz, saying, "Please, mate, listen, look, just let us buy you a drink, right? This place is closing, but we can get one down the road. Just heal me out. And after that, you can tell me to piss off if you want, and you'll never see me again, I swear." So John and Chaz, they go to another bar. And then John tells Chaz, "Look, I'm sorry, mate. I said some friggin' horrible things to you. I was off my head with Kit leaving and pissed as a fart, but that's no excuse. I was a bastard, alright? I'm sorry." Chaz asks, "So why'd you come back?" John answers, "'Cause, well, I'm gonna be winding things up soon and I wanted everything, put right." Chaz questions, "Oh, is that all?" John answers, "Well, it's also 'cause, we're mates as well, for God's sake." The two of them drink their drinks a little bit more. John then asks, "Did you really think my band, Mucous Membrane, were crap?" Chaz, he laughs and answers, "John, I roadied for practically every gig you did with that bleeding band. I heard it all, and I thought you were friggin' shit." John smiles and replies, "Well, it's a nice surprise after 15 odd years. I was listening to you tell the story, by the way. I'm sorry I never told you the end of it. I could have finished it better." Chaz to this says, "Yeah, well, that's always the friggin' problem, innit? You never used to tell me anything, because Chaz is a sodden moron. Chaz won't understand. And then I find out that that's not the worst of it, because what you really think of me is I'm just another asshole married to a fat bitch." John to this says, "Oh, come on, you know that's not it. That was just shit coming out because I was so bollocksed. I mean, you shoved my head down the toilet and said that was where I belonged." The two of them drink and talk some more, and eventually they go outside and they seem to be on the way to mending their friendship. John, he tells Chaz, I suppose I'm lucky anyone turned up at my bloody funeral. No one would again, I'll bet you." Chaz answers, I think I would." John to this says, "You'd be driving the friggin' hearse, mate." Well, with John and Chaz friends again, we begin the final story arc in Garth Ennis's run. Hellblazer issue 78, Rake at the Gates of Hell, Part 1 of 6. John and his friend Hedder broke into the Caligula Club to steal some pages that John needed. Only when they broke in, they triggered a silent alarm and some guards came, and Hedder tried shooting them off, only to get a shotgun blast to his chest. And John, once again, had to say goodbye to another friend that died on his watch. The next morning, we see John is with a new girl named Sarah. It is unclear how long they have been dating. Sarah is going to be a minor character in this story. Elsewhere, not in hell or heaven, but in limbo, which is expressed as a blank white void. In limbo, we see the first of the fallen. This is where he goes to contemplate. He is still trying to come up with a scheme, a plan to take John down. While he is in this void, he is visited by the spirit of Astra Logue. She died about 16 years ago during the Newcastle incident when John and his crew battled the demon Nergal, and John failed to save her. Astra had to go down to hell thanks to the demon Nergal. John tried to drag her out, and somehow severed her arm in the process. Astra explains to the first of the fallen who she is. "I am not long a demoness, Lord Satan. It is but 16 years since I first entered hell, at the hands of the mortal whose soul you so desire. My hatred of Constantine is second only to yours, my lord. My name was Astra." The first of the fallen asks, "I thought Nergal kept you as a toothpick, Starchild. I had no idea he had raised you to demonhood, and after so short a time, it's unheard of." Astra answers, "We were lovers. Well, he did the loving, and I took the power he gave me gladly. The joys that hell offers eclipse the ones I knew on earth, and then some. I was glad when you chastised him as you did, my lord. For all his bluster, Nergal was a buffoon. Nergal just caused but a fraction of the agony that Constantine caused me. That is why I hate him so, and that is why I have devised a plan to break the deadlock you and your brothers labor under, so I may see you take your revenge upon him. May I outline my scheme? Satan indeed is interested in Astra's plan." Back on Earth, John and Chaz are driving around when John sees an old friend of his walking on the street, a woman named Helen, who seems to be working as a prostitute. John gets out of the car and runs over to her as he is concerned for Helen. Helen looks like she is such a mess, high on drugs and desperate for more. John wants to get Helen help, but Helen still longs for drugs. Drugs which are supplied to her thanks to her pimp, Phil. Despite Phil taking advantage of Helen and her addiction, she still seems hopelessly under the influence of her pimp. And just as she explains herself to John, her pimp, Phil, arrives. John has words with the pimp. The two of them then start fighting. The pimp kicks John in the stomach, and before he can do more severe damage, Chaz steps in and hits Phil with a crowbar. And after that, John, Chaz, and Helen escape in the car. Moments after that, John phones his new girlfriend Sarah and asks if she can get in contact with her sister, Lucy, who is a nurse, and if the two of them can help his friend Helen out. Elsewhere, we see George Foster, who Garth Ennis accidentally forgot the last name of and referred to him as George Ridley in the story, despite him being called George Foster in a previous story arc. Well, anyway, so we see this George Foster, and we met him a few story arcs ago. His brother, Des Foster, got killed by some white supremacists. George and Des were allies of John's. And George, who is living in his mother's home, is going to face some more racial issues. Two police officers storm into his bedroom, and then they claim they found drugs on George, although they just planted the drugs in actuality. The two police officers then start escorting George out of the house to arrest him. George's mother starts arguing back with the police officers, and in the scuffle, the cops push George's mother, and she tumbles down some steps, cracks her head, and dies. So these two cops accidentally killed George's mom. When they realize what they've done, they start scheming how they can lie their way out of this. George, he then breaks away from the cops, runs into his bedroom, grabs a shotgun, runs back over to the cops, blasts one of the cops, and the cop gets shot in the shoulder and falls out the window to his death. Elsewhere, over at John's home, John has his friend Helen resting on a bed, and John's girlfriend Sarah is there with her sister, the nurse Lucy, and they are checking on Helen. Helen is very sick and hopelessly addicted to drugs and under the influence of her pimp. John wants them to help Helen kick the drugs and get away from her pimp. And John's new girlfriend, Sarah, can't believe that this is what her life has come to now that she's with John. She's helping hookers on the street kick heroin? This is not really what she signed up for, but she's willing to help. Lucy says that Helen needs to go to a hospital, but John argues that a hospital will get her on a methadone program for the smack, and that'll mean the cops, and then her bastard of a pimp is gonna come around and start asking for her, and Helen will be right back where she started. Sarah and Lucy think John is being crazy. They can't help this girl, but John, he pleads with them. He says that he'll get whatever medication they need for Helen. He'll steal it or whatever he has to, but no hospitals. Back down in hell, the first of the fallen, after talking to Astrologue, now has a plan to get back at John. In the Dangerous Habits story arc, it was established that the first of the fallen rules hell under a triumvirate with the second and third of the fallen, and all three of them had a claim on John's soul, and they could never kill John because they could never divide up the soul, and then it would lead to all sorts of infighting in hell. Well, it seems like the first of the fallen now has a way around this, and he is excited to put this new plan with this new information he has into action. He tells some of his assistants, "Send a letter to each of my two brothers, the second and the third of the fallen, the equal and opposite points on the triarchy. Tell them their brother wishes to meet them in the neutral territory of Limbo, and that I have formulated a solution to the problem of John Constantine, and look forward to reaping the benefits along with my beloved kinsman." After dictating this letter, the first of the fallen wants to celebrate with some champagne. Hellblazer issue 79, Rake at the Gates of Hell, part 2 of 6. Helen, suffering withdrawals, begins to snap. She yells at John, "Get away from me! Get away! I don't want your friggin' help! I hate you! You're a friggin' bastard! I bloody hate you! And take me back to Phil or I'll kill you! I want my fix! I want my fix! You gotta take me back to Phil!" Someone eventually injects some sort of tranquilizer into Helen and puts her down. Several people there tell John that Helen really needs to be in a hospital, but once again, John refuses, not believing Helen would be safe at a hospital. John and Chaz leave Helen with the others to take care of some business. In the car, we learn that John used to date Helen. John tells Chaz, "She never drank or took anything, and I knew she'd never need to, and now look at the bleeding state of her." As they are driving in the car, Chaz informs John of apparently what has been going down with George, and the cops killing his mother and arresting him, and George killing one of the cops. When John learns this, him and Chaz go to where George is being held, and using some magic, John lies and manipulates some of the officers into letting George go. We don't see any of this go down, but we see the aftermath of it as one of the cops is getting a talking to from one of his superiors. Elsewhere, the pimp Phil beats one of the local thugs, a man named Lenny Fisher, for some information on where John might be keeping his girl Helen. After Lenny suffers a finger being cut off and a tooth being pulled, he gives Phil all the information he needs. Elsewhere, after John got his friend George to safety, John continued on with the rest of his work, and he traveled to the apartment of his friend, the psychic medium Nigel Archer. John brings Nigel the Archangel Gabriel's heart for Nigel to keep for him. John also wants Nigel's help to track Gabriel down, which perhaps Nigel can do with his powers. Elsewhere, we see George Foster is with his friends, and they are keeping George hidden as the police are looking for him. They are discussing all the racial tension in the neighborhood, and the escalation between the cops and the residents here, and how things might be boiling over soon. Later, we see that John has managed to track the angel Gabriel down. Gabriel, still wingless, is a sad sack on the street. Gabriel tells John, "I had hoped I had heard the last of you." John responds, "Can't hide from me, Gabe. Not so long as I've got your ticker tucked away. But cheer up, your big moment has arrived. I'm getting a bit of a trap ready for your old adversary, the first of the fallen. I'll set him up for you and then you kick 7 shades of shit out of him. He was never in your league, so I reckon you'll breeze it. You do a good job, and I might even consider giving you your heart back." Gabriel, interested in this, asks, "You would?" John answers, "Nah, I'm only joking, but I'd maybe leave you alone for a bit." Gabriel asks, "Do I really deserve such incessant cruelty?" John responds, "That's funny, that's what Rick the Vic asked me. And you know what I said to him? I said, Rick, with the things that enormous bastard has done in the name of the Lord down the ages, I think I'm letting him off bloody lightly." Gabriel to this says, "You may dress it up whatever way you choose, Constantine. It is still nothing but petty mortal spite." John to this says, "Yeah, well, I'm only human, aren't I? You are the angel. I'll be in touch." Meanwhile, the pimp, Phil, has found where Helen is, and he beats up and ties up the others and has his way with Helen. And elsewhere in the neutral territory of Limbo, Satan, the first of the fallen, meets with his 2 brothers, the second and third of the fallen. The first of the fallen then explains how they are not actually brothers. They are not actually equals. The first of the fallen is superior to them. It was all just a bluff by God, and now the first of the fallen knows the truth, so he will take his rightful place above his brothers. The first of the fallen explains, "We're not brothers. The Creator bluffed us. He dealt the cards at the table when the world began, and he left us to it. He's probably still laughing. I'm called the devil. It's not a title that I mind. Mortals have to call me something, but it is totally inaccurate. I fell before there were even any angels to become devils, or demons, or whatever. When I got to the bottom, there wasn't even a hell for me to rule. That came later with Lucifer. Anyway, when you 2 popped up with your power equal to mine to balance my rule over the inferno that grew up around me, I assumed you were in precisely the same boat as I was. But you weren't, were you? You 2 are devils, exceptionally powerful lords of hell, but devils all the same. And you in turn assumed that I was the same as you. And we each mistook the other for our equal, but we were wrong. Our power is equal, yes, but our particular strengths are not, and neither are our weaknesses." Satan's brothers say, "True, this cannot be." The first of the fallen answers, "Can it not? Can you remember us even once warring upon each other? Oh, we threatened and posed and barred our fangs until we were blue into the face, but we never actually tested the balance of the triarchy, did we? What we've done down all the aeons is to keep hell from being any threat to him whatsoever, which was precisely his intention in the first place." The second of the fallen asks, "How did he discover this?" The first answers, "Oh, I just put 2 and 2 together. I went mad with rage when I finally realized. I don't mind telling you. I don't think there's any entity left in my palace with its soul still intact. But once I got it out of my system, I saw the positive side after all. As you 2 are devils, and not just called such, as I'd thought, I needed nothing more than a simple holding spell. I, on the other hand, might be called the devil, but I'm not, so the same trick won't work on me. All in the naming, eh? Which brings us right up to date. You're screwed, and I'm not. The first of the Fallen then begins using his powers to kill the second of the Fallen. The second of the Fallen screams. The first gloats, saying, "I should take my time with you, shouldn't I? You know, shit in your faces, bend you over Heaven's Gate and give it to you till you scream, that kind of thing, but why bother? This is Constantine's big day, not yours." So Satan then appears to kill the second of the Fallen. And then he turns to the third of the Fallen, and he just says, "Let there be light." And then the lightness of Limbo overcomes the darkness of the third of the Fallen and seemingly kills him, too. With Satan victorious over his brothers, he tells Astra, "After Constantine, my lady Astra, Hell will provide your reward. As for the man himself, well, you just watch this. You're going to like it." As the first of the Fallen goes on his way, Astra seemingly collects the essence of the second and third of the Fallen and forge them into a weapon with which to betray Satan with later. Astra says to herself, "After Constantine, Lord Satan, Hell will be my reward." Hellblazer Issue 80, Rake at the Gates of Hell, Part 3 of 6. John checks in on his friend, George Foster. John is worried as George seems to be preparing for a war with the city's corrupt police. George has a whole bunch of shotgun shells with him. John tries to talk George out of this, try to make him see reason and to calm things down, but George will not be swayed. Elsewhere, at a bar called Helter Skelter, the first of the Fallen arrives. He heard that someone here wanted to meet him. That someone was John's friend, the Lord of the Dance. The Lord of the Dance interrupts Satan and says he wanted a word with the devil. Satan, who appears to be familiar with the Lord of the Dance, asks, "What do you want, Arcadian?" That must be the Lord of the Dance's other name, Arcadian. This is the first time I'm hearing it. The Lord of the Dance explains he's here to talk on behalf of his friend, John Constantine. He says, "John helped me through a bad patch a couple of Christmases ago, and I owe him one for it. So my interest is in you leaving him alone." Satan to this says, "What? Do you seriously think that for even 1 minute I would?" The Lord of the Dance responds, No, I don't suppose I do." Well, the Lord of the Dance then headbutts Satan and causes Satan's nose to get all bloody. Satan recomposes himself and slashes at the Lord of the Dance, ripping out his ribcage, causing the Lord of the Dance to bleed profusely. Satan then warns the Lord of the Dance, "I'm not gonna kill you, moron, because I like a good party myself, and I don't want to have to destroy the Spirit Lord of Celebration at the time of my greatest triumph. But I'm telling you now, you ever screw with me again, you even dream of it, and the party's bloody well over." Elsewhere, Chaz reports back in to John that apparently Helen's pimp, Phil, he found Helen and beat the living shit out of her, and God knows what else he'd have turned up if Chaz didn't arrive. When Chaz arrived, Phil ran off, and the others took Helen to a hospital to see a doctor. John feels terrible, like this is his fault. Elsewhere, John's other friend, Rick the Vic, is in church with a beautiful lady friend of his, only to be interrupted by Satan himself, punching through the doors of the church. Rick immediately realizes that this is serious. He tells the girl he was with, "Run, Betsy, run and never look back." Rick then runs to the altar up at the front of the church, and he grabs a machine gun that he keeps hidden there. And then Rick, he turns the gun on Satan and begins firing at him. As Rick is firing, he begins reciting scripture. He says, "I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." But the bullets, they just bounce off of Satan, and Satan continues walking towards Rick. Eventually, Rick realizes he is toast. He can't kill Satan, so Rick turns the gun on himself and shoots, committing suicide, trying to kill himself before Satan could inflict worse onto him. Later on, John visits Helen at the hospital, and he sees that she was beat into an inch of her life by her pimp, Phil. John also sees the others there, all giving John a disappointed, kind of angry look, as they feel John was responsible for this mess. John's girlfriend, Sarah, gives him a talking to. John, he feels awful. He asks, "Did he rape her?" Sarah answers, "Why? Isn't it bad enough for you yet? You really are something, do you know that? You want it that way, so it's really bad, so you can get good and angry enough to go out there and commit whatever atrocity you've got in mind for that guy. But it won't help Helen one bit. But you don't care because you know you're no good at helping her anyway, because all you've got is your friggin' revenge. You're just like every other macho bastard I've known. You can't think with anything except your dick or your fists. You think you know it all. You think you're trying to help, and all you're doing is making things worse." John, he leaves the hospital, and he connects back with Chaz. And in the car, John asks Chaz if Chaz knows some people that can beat up this Phil guy. John, he gives instructions saying, "Get some pair of savages and pay him whatever they ask to stomp him, alright? Tell him to make sure he gets out of town and he never comes back. And tell them when they're doing it to do it hard." Chaz tells John, "Well, if that's what you want." John answers, "Yeah, and money's no problem." Later on, down in hell, Rick the Vic is there, and he is being mocked by Satan. Satan tells Rick, "Are you surprised? Suicide is a sin, remember? So your ass is mine, as they say. Preach to me, preacher man. Where does Constantine keep the Archangel's heart?" Rick the Vic, shocked he is down in hell, feels like he has no choice. So he tells Satan that Constantine keeps Gabriel's heart with his friend, Nigel Archer. Elsewhere, back on Earth, tensions between the police and George and his people in the street begin to rise. We see on one side of the street are a whole bunch of civilians with weapons, and on the other side are the cops in SWAT gear. Soon things begin kicking off. Elsewhere, we see Satan has retrieved the Archangel Gabriel's heart, and then Satan found Gabriel on the streets. Satan beats up Gabriel a bit, and then he holds Gabriel's heart in his hands. Gabriel begs the first of the fallen, "Please, don't crush my heart, please, don't. I'll do anything. I'll find Constantine for you, I swear, but please, I'm begging you. I swear, whatever you want. Anything. I love you, Lord Satan, I love you. I'll serve you always. Shit on me, piss on me, do what you want with me, but don't do it. Don't make me go to hell. I know what my father did to you. He was wrong, he was sick. Oh, Lord Satan, I'm so sorry, please." So, if Satan crushes Gabriel's heart, Gabriel will fall down to hell, and Gabriel really doesn't want that. Satan, though, he doesn't care. He crushes Gabriel's heart and says, "I'm touched." Elsewhere, we see John Constantine is in his friend Nigel's apartment, and John finds the box where Gabriel's heart was being kept. John, when he sees it empty, says, "Shit." Hellblazer, issue 81, Rake at the Gates of Hell, part 4 of 6. The thugs that John hired through Chaz manage to catch up with Phil the pimp, and they beat him senseless. And they make sure that Phil knows Constantine is behind this. At the end of their confrontation, Phil is definitely ready to get out of town. Elsewhere, a Father Calloway is walking through his church. He hears some noises coming from the basement. As he approaches the basement steps, he sees some pagan symbols drawn onto the floor of the stairs. The priest goes down the stairs and finds John at the bottom of them. John is hiding out here, hiding from Satan, and the pagan symbols were meant to protect him. Elsewhere, the streets have fallen into anarchy. There are riots, the police and the civilians are going at it. Molotov cocktails are being thrown, and George is right in the middle of everything. Meanwhile, the first of the Fallen and Astra are waiting at John Constantine's home. Satan has made himself comfortable, lying in John's bed. Astra asks, "So where's Constantine?" Satan answers, "Oh, skulking around somewhere perhaps. Hidden with wards and so on. It doesn't really matter. Sooner or later he'll wonder why I'm not coming after him and go to his friends for help with some scheme or other. That's when he'll get his last couple of nasty shocks. I want him truly wretched for the end." There's one thing I haven't been able to work out though. What was John doing at the Caligula Club? That preacher of his told me Constantine stole a number of pages from the club a day or two ago. Some kind of historical work. Very odd. That's all he could tell me about it. We saw this a few issues ago when John was with Heder, and Heder died. Heder died, stealing those pages with John. Astra asks, well, with the Archangel Gabriel out of the picture, is there anything John can possibly do to harm you? Satan answers, "Good point." Astra then questions, "I was wondering, what kind of things you've got planned for him, Lord Satan, once you get him down below?" To this, Satan replies, where to begin? Back over to the basement of that church. Father Calloway is talking with John. The priest asks, "Why is this place covered in blasphemous symbols of pagan adultery? The work of Satan?" John answers, "Oh, I sort and hope not. They're meant to hide me from him. Why don't you sit down before you fall down, Father?" John explains how he's hiding from Satan. The priest doesn't really believe John, though. But John just continues explaining anyway and says, "He's after me because I screwed him over a few times. Spiteful type, know what I mean? I had the Archangel, Gabriel, by the balls for a while. I was gonna use him for protection, but that fell through. Just a matter of time now." The priest thinks John is insane. He then questions, "If you are in such terrible danger, why are you taking it so calmly?" John takes a swig of some booze and answers, "I don't know, Father. I had a bloke beat into a pulp earlier this evening. That sound calm to you? I must have been off my bleeding rocker. I've never done anything like that before in my life, you know, but there's Hedda, gets his guts blown out, and George is sticking his head in the noose, and Helen gets, oh Jesus. Then friggin' Sarah bites my head off, and now I'm just like all the bastards I've hated all my life. I'm saying stuff like, kill him, fire him, close them down, piss all over him, screw you, I can do whatever I want. I so much as blink and you're dead, pal. I'm in charge." John, he doesn't like the kind of man he's becoming. The priest starts pulling out the Bible, going to try and give John a lesson. But John stops the priest and says how he's not interested in the Bible, the edited word of God. John then begins a whole rant. He says, "Your mob had that little book locked away in Rome for 1,000 years, Father. Do you know how much they chopped out, changed, made up?" The priest argues, "They were holy men." John continues, "They were wankers. They screwed everything that moved, killed anyone who messed them about, and fed off the suckers. What would have stopped them from doing a quick rewrite of that thing?" The priest questions what John means about them rewriting the scriptures. John answers, "They couldn't even do it properly. Ever wondered why he's a god of vengeance in the Old Testament and a god of love in the new one? Why an eye for an eye becomes turn the other cheek?" The priest tries to interject, but John just cuts him off, saying, "Shut up for a minute, will you? And what about the end of it? Love me or you'll burn in hell? That sounds like a spoiled kid." The priest tells John it isn't for us to judge. John responds, "I said shut up. I'll judge whatever I sod and well want. That's all the pricks have left me, the pricks with the power. I'll tell you what, Father, the next time you're talking to your lord, you tell him from me, right? You tell him Constantine won't give in. You tell him no matter how bad or sad it gets, how much it falls to bits on me, how many holes there are in my worthless sod in life, I'll never plug it with this bollocks." John says this as he holds the Bible in the priest's face. While this convo is going down, escalation and riots in the streets continue. One of George's allies gets gunned down right before his eyes. Back to John and the priest under the church. John, he wonders why the sigils on the steps aren't glowing bright red by now. They haven't even activated, which means Satan's not looking for him. Maybe things aren't as bad as John thought. John then tells the priest that he has another friend that's helping him with a sort of backup plan. 1,000,000 to 1 shot that the plan works, but John supposes he's going to have to try for it. John decides to leave the church and he heads outside, and the priest walks with him. As John is outside, he looks into the sky and sees that it is seemingly bright red. Perhaps the sun is coming up. The priest tells John, actually, it was on the radio just before I found you. Apparently a riot has begun somewhere, and quite a lot of cars and things have been set on fire. So that's what the light in the sky is. Several people have died. John sarcastically responds, "Oh, I love this town." The priest tells John, "So it's not a sunrise after all, I'm afraid." John to this says, "It'll have to do." Hellblazer issue 82, Rake at the Gates of Hell, part 5 of 6. Kit Ryan has traveled back from Belfast to London to see John. This is their first meeting since their big breakup about a year or so ago. They kiss hello. The two of them talk of old times and what they have been up to. Kit says she took on a teaching job that pays okay. John explains he hasn't been sleeping much. He's dealing with a lot of things. They eventually go to a diner to get food and coffee. Kit explains that she's been out with 2 or 3 fellas since she broke up with John, but nothing serious happened. After they finish up their lunch, they begin leaving the diner. That is when John gets serious, even emotional, which is saying a lot for John. John tells Kit, "When we ended it, right? It broke me clean in two. I've never gone as low as I did after I walked out of your place last year. I don't know if you remember this, but I told you I'd never got so close to anyone or felt so good, and I told you I'd never talked to anyone that way before in my life. Well, that's even more true now. You came back here to find me, well, here I am. Whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go, just say the word and I'll do it. You want me to leave London and give up the magic? And even knock off the sodden cigarettes? No problem. Anything at all. I'm yours." So John, he's laying it all on the line. He wants Kit back and he's willing to give up the bad parts of his life that Kit opposes to. Kit tells John, "I'm sorry." John turns away from her. Kit grabs John. He says, "No, I don't want it. I don't want it, sorry. I don't want to be just friends." John, he starts losing it and getting angry. He's prepared to storm away. But Kit yells back at him, "Constantine, stop your friggin' grinning and listen to me, or everything we've had will be shite, and your friggin' fault." The two of them then head to a bar to get a drink and talk some more about their relationship. Kit, she asks about John's new girlfriend, Sarah. She heard about her from Jazz. John says, Right, Sarah. Sarah and me are over. You won't believe this, but it's actually really slipped my mind." Kit tells John, "Do you not remember why it didn't work out before between us? Because of all the stuff you would get into? I'll bet you're up to your neck in some scam right now, and I know you probably forgot about it the minute you saw me, but you're still doing it, aren't you?" John has a solemn look on his face. He thinks about his past and answers, Yeah. Kit, she then sits beside John, and she talks of her old boyfriend, Brandon, who used to be John's friend, who died drinking himself to death. Kit explains that she was with Brandon for a while, but she was tired of his self-destructiveness. She always knew he was going to drink himself to death, and nothing she could say to him would stop that. So eventually, she gave up, she packed her bags and left. And the day she did, she begged Brandon to lay off the drink. Kit explains to John, "Well, he was half cut anyway, and he gave me this droopy grin and he said, sure, I know I've had it, but I'll play this bloody thing out to the end anyway. And maybe at the end I'll manage a wee smile among the tears. He was proud of himself. He saw this boozer's nobility in what he was doing. An Irish inevitability, that's what he called it. So I looked at this wee man with his face all red, with burst blood vessels and the glass of beer shaking in his hand, and I just thought, Jesus Christ, I've never heard of anything so bloody horrible. You see, John, when I saw Brandon do that to himself, and I heard his friggin' stupid reason for it, I swore I'd never get involved with a man like that again. All he did with his life was try and end it a bit quicker, every waking moment. And then you came along, and I had to break up with you because, oh God, John, I know you're doing exactly the same thing he did, in your own way. I couldn't forget you. It's been over a year, but I just couldn't. We ended it so badly. I have to get on with my life, but I can't do it without seeing you, John. So I came back to look for you, to say goodbye. Kit then begins tearing up. The two of them then go to a little bed and breakfast. They spend the night together, they make love, but they say goodbye. And in the morning, Kit leaves. John eventually goes to a diner. On the TV, he hears more about the riots in the streets and the police clashing with citizens. John's attention then turns to the First of the Fallen and his plans. John, he has to find Nigel. He needs Nigel to help him get in contact with someone psychically. John starts walking through the street. He sees all the death and destruction around. He walks a few miles, eventually arrives at his friend Nigel's flat. John lets himself inside Nigel's flat and finds Nigel dead, lying on a table with a hole in his head. A hole caused by some sort of sword or dagger stabbed through Nigel's head. John, he lets out a tear. He then goes to the balcony and looks at the fires on the city below. And then the First of the Fallen walks beside John and says to John, "My kinda town." And with this, we head over to the conclusion of Garth Ennis' run, Hellblazer issue 83, Rake at the Gates of Hell, part 6 of 6. The conclusion. John drops to his knees and vomits blood. And while John suffers, the devil pontificates. Satan has a book of apparently Nigel's poetry in his hands. And the First of the Fallen makes fun of Nigel's writing. He says, "Ugh, I do despise little masturbators like this, wanking himself blind until he couldn't see his feminist principles and hiding his Mayfairs under a complete run of socialist worker. Really, killing him was an act of mercy. Do you know what he called me before he died? He called me a dirty Tory bastard." Bless his tearful righteous outrage and his cute little upraised fist. "Power to the workers," he sobbed. John, sick on the floor, spitting out blood, asks, "What did you do to me?" Satan answers, "I've given you back your lung cancer." "You're not blaming me, are you? I wasn't the one that was smoking 30 cigarettes a day. I wasn't the one who went at life like a half-assed gambler either." John, he asks the devil about what Father Tully told him several issues ago. Apparently, Satan confessed something to him, something that turned him all crazy, and then he burned his church down and turned into a bleeding mass murderer. The devil, amused by this, decides to share with John what he shared with the priest. Satan says, "In the beginning, before the heaven and the earth and the angels and so on, God created me. I wasn't the devil then, didn't have a name, but I could see and touch and think and speak, which I assumed was why I was created in the first place. So God would have someone to talk to. He had a lot to talk about. He planned to build a golden kingdom, peopled by beautiful and kindly angels, and far below it would be a universe of stars and moons and planets, all interlinked, all relying on each other like a perfect piece of clockwork. Life on the planets would be like that too. Animal and vegetable, carnivore, herbivore, ecosystem so complex and yet so perfectly simple that they could never fail. I imagined stars at dawn, and moonlit snowfields, whale song in the marinas, tiger tracks, and endless green wings so wide that a world could shelter under them. And I shouted yes until my tears ran through my smile. And that was what I thought was intended. He would use the power he had for marvelous creation, never tiring of the variety and depth of beauty he could bring to the universe. An endless palette, an endless canvas. John chimes in, with you nodding approval from the sidelines, I suppose. Satan answers, I don't deny it. A guiding hand on the tiller with everyone's best interests at heart. And that's where I made my first mistake. He planned to enhance his creation with a new race he'd been thinking about. Its chief characteristic was the replacement of instinct with a rather grandiose concept of free will. Disastrous notion, of course. Offer a choice and 9 out of 10 people will instantly make the wrong one, asking for trouble. And I told him so. I still remember the look he gave me. One eye narrow, one wide. What did you say? I had that plummeting freefall sensation that only the most exquisite faux pas can bring to a conversation. The dreadful awareness that words can never heal the wound and nothing can ever be the same again. What could I do? I no longer had his ear. I had no more idea of what he planned than his angels did. I was terrified. I skulked around the kingdom of heaven like a wayward infant, expecting his father's voice of justice with every step he takes. Well, I dodged him for a while and avoided him until I crept backwards through an archway one starlit afternoon, certain I was being pursued, and there he was. I found the great Redeemer squatting in a corner of eternity, clutching at his genitals and drooling. John comments, mad as assholes in other words. Satan answers, and that's why he gave humanity the choice, and why he imagined they'd pick him. Why a loving God would curse his creation with centuries of pain, why a supreme being is so enamored of free will. Anyway, he knew I knew, and he threw me out of heaven, and I've been falling ever since. After that, he went ahead with it anyway. The heavenly host weren't much more than a dry run for humanity, and look at them now, stormtroopers with halos. Down below, my purpose was clear. I had to storm the walls of heaven, to bring sanity to the heart of creation, and the only way to do that was to raise an army. So I took advantage of the choice he was so keen on, and I offered one of my own. I offered and bribed and cajoled and threatened, and my realm and my soul and legions grew and grew. The other fallen appeared, but what were they except distractions? On and on I went, my eyes forever on my goal, my dream of earthly paradise before me, and then, bang! There was you. Had I the sense I was created with, I'd have walked away from you. So what? You beat me, big deal, forget about it, and get on with the job at hand. But no, I couldn't. You really hooked me, Constantine. You twisted and turned me and woke me right up. The methods I employed had their effect on me. I know the tools I use are lust and envy and hate and avarice. What good would I be in building us a better world? My reactions, decisions are all based on hatred. I saw the frenzy I got into over a little thing like you, and I knew myself. I am exactly what the devil should be. The tempter, the deceiver, the serpent crawling in the garden. The adversary. The figure I'd sneered at in hundreds of paintings. The role I'd laughed so hard at when I read it in the fictions, and here I am! But, ever since I fell, I've wondered down the aeons what he meant me for, what sense of purpose dredged me from within that mind. What was the point of someone he could talk to if he wouldn't listen? And that has torn at me since. John replies, easy. You're his conscience. You were that little voice everyone gets in their head, chum, except you were in his. Come on, don't do that, do this. Don't say that, don't be nasty. Don't hurt her. Don't have that last drink. Get on home, do the right thing. That was you. John, he then starts laughing, and the devil yells, don't laugh at me, you little bastard. I tried to make it better. John to this says, that's what they all say. You're just another tosser. Thought he'd lead us to the promised land. So you've twigged you were played for a twat in the first place. Big bloody deal. Don't come whining to me about it, bollocks. Satan yells back, "You piece of shit! Who the hell do you think you are?" As Satan and John talk further, eventually, Astrologue, now a demon, appears. John remembers her from his past and how he failed her, and he does not want to see her. He yells, "No! For Christ's sake, get her away from me! I don't want to look at her! Take her away!" The devil asks John, "What did you say to her when you led her into hell? Trust me?" Astra chimes in and says, "You said, take my hand. Don't be afraid. I'll look after you." John, he then tears up at his past failings with Astra and says, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Satan then grabs John by the collar and holds him up in the air. He's finally ready to kill him. Satan says to John, "I was looking forward to this, but it's an anticlimax. You're nothing to speak of, really. A little gambler's luck and dog shit for a heart. That's all you are. You sent a little girl to hell, and it's been downhill ever since. We may as well just play out our roles then. I'm the devil and you're the sinner. We both know where we're going now." Just as the first of the fallen is about to finally end John, all of a sudden, Astrologue in the background shifts into Chantanelle, the succubus. We saw in some previous story arcs that Chantanelle had the ability to change her appearance. Well, it turns out that this was all some sort of long con plan. She took the form of Astra as a way to get close to the first of the fallen. And now she has a weapon that she forged out of the second and third of the fallen after the first killed them. So with this formed weapon, and with the element of surprise, she stabs Satan in the back through to the front of his chest. Satan, surprised, his body begins to glow. He asks, "What?" And then he seemingly dies and disappears. John, he passed out in the commotion, and when he eventually woke up, Chantanelle was there. She told John, "Come on, wake up. You're not dead yet." Chantanelle has a disgusting looking thing in her hand that looks all bloodied. John asks her what that is. Chantanelle answers, "Fronds of cancer cells. I've just pulled them out of your lungs. Now that he's gone, I can do anything." John then asks where Satan is. Chantanelle answers, "Wherever the devil goes when he dies. If he didn't know himself, how'd you expect me to? Scared the hell out of him anyway." John then comments, "Speaking of which, that was a bleeding disguise and a half you chose, wasn't it?" Chantanelle explains, "It was the only thing that would get me close enough without him becoming suspicious. I didn't have room to worry about opening wounds in your conscience, John." Now that things are calming down, Chantanelle asks John, "What do you make of his big speech?" John answers, "True or false, you mean? I don't know, but it's more of a laugh than the one where we all grew out of monkeys, isn't it?" Chantanelle, she then tells John, "The pages you gave me, the history of the fallen, they cost Heder his life, didn't they?" John explains, "Yeah." Chantanelle continues, "Everything I heard tonight made sense to me, John. And in case you've forgotten, you owe me now." So it turns out that those pages that John and Heder stole from the Caligula Club gave Chantanelle the information she needed so that she could form this weapon that would seemingly kill Satan. And now that Chantanelle has done this dangerous task for John, she no longer owes John a favor anymore. In fact, John pretty much now owes her a favor. In the aftermath of these events, John is walking the street. He runs into his friend George. George is still alive. He managed to survive the riots with the police. George explains, "It was like Armageddon. About 30 died. Both sides kicked the shit out of each other for about a day or two, and then everyone pissed off home." George says that now he has to live a life on the run, though. And a lot of his friends died, too. John, who can kind of relate to losing a lot of his friends, tells George, The only thing I'd dare say to you is, mate, you keep that idea you've got, don't you ever forget it. You let that little twinge of guilt stay with you and slide up close to you on long winter nights, and maybe you'll get some good out of it. The two of them then say goodbye. Later on, John meets his friend, Helen. Thanks to John's help, Helen managed to kick the drugs, at least for now, although she did lose an eye when her pimp, Phil, beat her up. But Helen, she thanks John, saying, "If it wasn't for you, I'd still be on the game, selling myself to get money for smack. I'm lucky I got off as easy as I did." John then walks her to her bus she needs to catch. She tells John, "Look, if this was a film or something, I'd still be in one piece and you'd be able to make sure nothing went wrong for me ever again, and we'd probably live happily ever after. But it's not, is it? It's just up and down and random and untidy old life. I'm not saying I'll never end up whoring again or ever going back to being a smackhead, because I haven't a clue what'll happen to me. There's no rules, no absolutes where people are concerned. That's the only thing I'm certain of, but you gave me a chance, Johnny. It's just a tiny, tiny wee thing, but Christ almighty, thanks for it." John tells her, "Oh, I didn't do anything." Helen responds, "Yes, you did. You're very special, Johnny. As long as you have people who think so, you always will be." John tears up a bit as he hugs Helen goodbye. Johnny then thinks to himself, "When I let her go, it felt like life itself was slipping through my fingers. I started to say something, I don't know, something bloody stupid and sentimental, something not very Constantine at all. But she knew as well as I did that it wouldn't last for long, that I'd be no use if I came with her, and even if I did change, shit, I'd just laugh it off and drown it in bravado. So the last thing she said to me, her smile getting wider all the time, was, 'Good night, and God bless, and now fuck off to bed.'" And with that, we end Rake at the Gates of Hell, as well as we conclude Garth Ennis' run on Hellblazer.
All right, so that was the conclusion of Garth Ennis' Hellblazer run. Let me go through my thoughts on this final volume. I have a lot of them. So the first story arc in here, the 4-issue Damnation's Flame story arc, I did not like. I thought it was kind of bad. I don't like when characters are stuck in a dream world and have to like fight their way out of the dream world. I just never like that in any media, in TV or movies or whatever. It's always a waste of time to me. So I did not like that. I wish Papa Midnight and John's confrontation was more direct and a little bit more epic, because I think Papa Midnight is a pretty cool character. So yeah, I kind of don't love how they were kind of separated the entire story arc. And then Papa Midnight dies in a maybe a little bit of an anticlimactic way, where his sister kind of from beyond the grave somehow messes with him and makes him jump off the Empire State Building. So I wanted a little bit more from that. So I was a little bit disappointed in Damnation's Flame. It also went on for quite a while, 4 issues. The next issue in here was called Confessions of an Irish Rebel. I don't know if you guys know this, but Garth Ennis is Irish. So any excuse to get a character in Ireland or have some Irish characters in the mix, he is going to do, even if we, the reader, don't always want to read it. But yeah, John's on a plane back to London. There's plane issues. He has to land in Ireland. And then John's dead friend, Brandon Finn, is going to come back here as a ghost, and him and John are going to hang out. In a way, it is nice to have John and Brandon have this last kind of night together as a ghost and sort of send that character off. But honestly, I didn't need more of Brandon. I was ready to move on. But anyway, it was fine. Next issue was called And the Crowd Goes Wild. That is the one where Chaz is with his friends, and he tells this story of him and John's past, and when John seemingly died and they had a funeral for John. So I thought that was a little interesting flashback story. And then I like that finally John and Chaz make up and become friends again, because, you know, I want them to be friends. So yeah, I like this story arc, and I'm glad that it kind of put John and Chaz back together, and we can continue onward from that and head into Rake at the Gates of Hell, the 6-issue story arc. So in this 6-issue story arc, we had this one subplot with this George guy, which was not needed. It should have been cut. I don't think it was added much at all. There was this subplot with Helen, this sort of prostitute who's addicted to heroin. And I don't know if that was necessarily needed too, although it did kind of illustrate John's, compassion and wanting to help all of his friends, even if it's to the detriment of himself sometimes. So it was okay to have that explored a little bit here. We had a lot of deaths in this story arc. So we had the death of Gabriel, although I guess he's still kind of going to be in hell or whatever. But, there was a lot of past story arcs dealing with Gabriel and getting his heart so that they could use it. And John kind of had a plan with the heart and make Gabriel fight Satan, but then Satan just crushes the heart, and that's kind of it. So it kind of makes some of those past storylines a little bit of a waste. Anyway, we also had the death of Heather, who was a character that was not very fleshed out. So whatever to John's friend Heather. We had the death of Rick the Vic and the Nigel Archer. So that was a little bit of a bummer that those characters died. We almost had the death of the Lord of the Dance, but thank God he lived, because Satan didn't want to end the party spirit. So thankfully, the Lord of the Dance will continue to live, because I really like that character. And also, thankfully, Chaz made it out of this story arc alive. Now, we had Kit Ryan come back in the story, so her and John could have some closure. And I really liked that issue they had, where they kind of explored their relationship and made up, but they weren't going to get back together. And I also like that Kit Ryan didn't have to die to be written out of the story. Just their breakup is going to have some closure, and they're going to move on with their lives. And which is kind of also relatable to everyone else out there in the real world that has a relationship that maybe didn't work out. We can see that explored here. So I thought that was pretty good. All right. Now, the big thing in this story arc is, of course, John's confrontation with Satan. Everything that has been building up since Dangerous Habits is going to be paid off here. And I think some of the payoffs were good and some were not so great. I think Satan's convoluted explanation for his fall and the whole deal between the second and third of the Fallen, and how Satan is actually superior to them and they weren't actually equals in this triarchy. And how did Satan figure that out? He just thought about it a lot and he figured it out somehow. And so, yeah, I didn't love some of that explanation there and some of the exposition of everything. But in the end, it's still good to have John and Satan having this long talk, and that was pretty exciting stuff. I thought Chantanelle kind of being shape-shifting and then stabbing Satan in the back was maybe a little bit anticlimactic in a way, because she kind of did that before in a previous story arc with Gabriel, where she pretended to be someone else and then she got his heart, and she kind of did the same thing here. I would have liked a little bit more of a clever kind of ending. I liked in the Dangerous Habits story arc how John kind of used his smarts to beat the demons, and he had the 3 different demons wanting his soul, and that's how he kind of beat them. Where here, it's just kind of Chantanelle was pretending to be somebody else, and then she stabs Satan in the back. And that's the ending to the big epic confrontation between John and Satan. So I wanted a little bit more there, but still exciting and fun and a good time. And then we sort of have a coda after that, where John talks to this George guy, which whatever, and then he talks to this Helen girl and has a nice moment with her, and then we kind of end there. So on the whole, I thought some of this volume was not the best, but some of it was really good, really great, and exciting and fun. So I'm still very pleased here. I'm going to give this final volume an 8.5 out of 10. Thank you all for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on this volume, the conclusion, and Garth Ennis's run overall.